And
recording in progress.
we are now recording. Good deal. All right. Let me get this. All right, Greg, how are you, sir?
Doing all right. Got a solid 10 hours of sleep last night, I think.
Really?
So feeling all right.
Phil?
Yeah, I don't know if that's a good sign, just being that exhausted. These last few weeks have been a little intense.
Yeah,
I'm using my weekends to try to catch up.
I want to ask you about that. This has actually been sort of. I have first time in my life I've ever like binged on Netflix here, so I can't. COVID has changed my entire everything about my life has now changed, and so I'm actually at the cabin by myself. So I'm like, I work for a while and then I go outside and then I'm just like, all right, now what? So, So first of all, for my students out there and whoever ends up watching, Greg, just tell me who you are. I know who you are, but they don't know who you are. So we'll get that out of the way first.
All right. My name is Greg Kendall-Ball. It's hyphenated, 2 regular names, but when you put them together, it throws people for some reason. I get a lot of interesting mail.
Do they ask you, like, which one do you prefer? It's just like...
Yeah, or some people think Kendall's my first name, or like you go to the dentist and they start looking under the B's, or I don't know. And nobody knows what a hyphen is. I've seen asterisks and slashes, but yeah. Right now, I am a photo editor at the New York Times on the science and climate desks for about 2 weeks now, which has been a bit like learning to drink from a fire hose. Mm-hmm. Before that, I was living in Lake Tahoe and working for a commercial production company, helping produce ads on the photo side for a very large Bay Area tech company. Before that, I was living in Washington, D.C., and I was a picture editor for Nature, which is a science journal. Before that, I was a picture editor at the Washington Post for a little while. Before that, I was in graduate school at the University of Missouri. Mm-hmm. Before that, I was a journalist at the Reporter News in Abilene, Texas. That's always fun, be a journalist, then go to journalism school. I find that can be helpful.
On that note, we're going to...
Before that...
Merlin Mann at some point when you get back to Abilene, so okay.
Oh, yeah. And so before my newspaper career, I was studying religion and theology in seminary, preparing for an entirely different kind of career. So that's I think on my website bio I talk about all the different jobs I've had, which include like being a janitor and a waiter, and I think for a week I lasted at a lumber yard in Missouri. I've been a cookie artist. It's really weird.
I'm not ignoring you. I just realized that you were coming out of my computer speakers instead of through the headphones. And I was like, oh no. No, it's recording fine. I was just like,
really muffled.
No, you were fine. I was just like, something's different. And I was like, okay, sorry. See, even the professionals do stupid technical things. All right, now we're good. All right, so one of the things that you and I have in common in that world is like we both started out in this sort of world of religion and faith, and then somehow ended up here. I have found even since then that a lot of what I learned in that world still influences a lot of what I do now. Kind of personally on the way I approach it. So I actually started out in law enforcement after journalism school. So I spent 5 years as a cop. Which turns out wasn't that much different than being a journalist because, you investigate stuff and you write reports. You just also carry a gun. Then I went to graduate school and then I got picked up by the United Methodist Church to be their state communication director. And then I I ended up traveling all over the world with that thing. It was kind of, their version of National Geographic or whatever, and I was everywhere, which was kind of cool. And then I went to Congo, and that pretty much messed me up for everything else because that was just a game changer the way I experienced life. And so, yeah, and then I just remember I was like, and then you and I were chatting on Facebook one day, and I was like, I think Greg may be one of the few people in the world who gets this.
Maybe. It's yeah, I mean, I definitely think, and we can talk about my tattoo later if that because it does kind of circle back, but yes, I'd say 10 years. Yeah, so if I 9 years, I guess, starting in college, and then by the time I finished seminary and was still working, I think there was a little overlap. It's not like I stopped one day being a theology nerd or whatever, and then picked up photography. There was a period of overlap there where I was trying to make sense of my faith and what I wanted to do and be in the world, and this new infatuation, I guess, with photography. And then when I became a journalist, I think that definitely, in hindsight, of course, at the time, I kind of regretted spending all that time doing this other thing because I felt, I didn't pick up a camera seriously till I was 28, and felt like most of my peers, my colleagues, if we're being honest, my competitors, folks that you're competing for staff jobs or you're competing for freelance assignments, all those folks that I kind of saw myself as going up against had a decade of experience on me. And so for a long time I kind of kicked myself and regretted those wasted years, but then in hindsight it made me a different kind of journalist. And for a while, I think one of the beauties of working at a small paper like I did was I wasn't just a photographer. I was also a reporter. And I think because I could do both the writing and the photography, a lot of days I was on stories by myself, a lot of breaking news.
Right.
And on that beat, one of the things that you have to do, I don't know if you ever experienced this, but is doing the death knock. That when there's some sort of notable death in a community, you got to go try to get the story, knock on the door and say, I'm from the newspaper. You want to talk to me?
Right.
And I hated that, except it turned out to be some of the most rewarding experiences. I think there's a way to do it like a vulture, and then there's a way to really try to, give a family an opportunity to tell the story of their loved one beyond just the horrible or the weird way that they died. And in some ways, maybe my seminary training or my preparation to be a minister, if nothing else, it taught me how to talk with people, listen to them. And I think I got in to a lot of situations that I might not have if I had not had that training. I'm thinking of, there was one story where a young woman in Abilene she was killed by a train. It was the night before she was supposed to go back to college. And her dog got out and she went to go chase after the dog. The dog ran across the railway tracks, and this young woman was like hit and killed by the train. And so I had to go drive up to the house and try to, at least give them the opportunity to tell me no. And I get there and there's it was a Hispanic family, and these two huge uncles standing in the driveway, shaved heads, neck tattoos. I mean, very much like we don't want anybody knocking around. And my colleagues from the TV stations were on the far sidewalk, their cameras on tripods.
Right.
And I walked up to the uncles and I talked to them and said, here's what I'm here to do. If you let the family know that's kind of why I'm here, and, just being empathetic or trying to be to their situation. And they walked inside and talked to the mom, and she invited me in. And over the next couple hours, sat around the dining room table looking at pictures, and they told me the story of this young woman and took me into the bedroom to see like her bag packed to go back to college the next day. And it was just this very emotional, powerful experience of telling the story of someone who died too soon. And if I showed up and he was like, "Hi, I'm from the newspaper. You want to talk about your dead kid?" That probably ends the conversation right there.
Right.
And so, I mean, I also think, I mean, just I went to a liberal arts school that kind of emphasized learning a little bit about a lot, history, art, world, politics, geography, just trying to make you a well-rounded person. And then in seminary, I think I was also allowed to kind of explore some more of my interests. I grew up overseas, and I have a lot of family that is, even though I sound like this now and I travel on American passport, a big part of me, I think, is not American. And so those years in seminary gave me opportunities to look at the world and think about it differently. And then in a literal way, it was because of my ministry goals and my theology studies that took me to Central Africa, just next door to Congo. I was in Rwanda, and had never taken a picture, never photographed anything seriously. I took one black and white photography class in college, and it's not like the professor was like, "You should do this."
Right.
It was never really a thing, but I knew I was going to Central Africa, and I should probably get some pictures to throw in a report. And I'd always been a word person, writing. I read a lot. I think back in those days in seminary, I think each class had to assign 500 pages of reading per week. So I was reading a lot, writing 60, 70 page papers, preparing, sermons, or I'd always been kind of a verbal word person. And so I go to Rwanda and I have this digital camera with me, which was, just a basic entry level thing with a kit lens, and didn't know what I was doing with it. So I kept it on the green rectangle, but we walked into this genocide site, which was a small Catholic church, where in the area around the church and in the sanctuary itself, 5,000 people had been killed in the '94 genocide. And we were there, this would have been 7-8 years after that. And they had left the bodies where they'd fallen in this church instead of cleaning it up. And so it was stepping over bodies and skeletons in between the pews. And on the altar in front of this church was a skull of someone who had been decapitated as part of the genocide. And so I'm snapping just pure snapshots, and half of them are blurry. There's no composition. These are just very, very bad photographs. And I came back to Texas, and I wrote up, reports and tried to give talks about what this was like, because my wife and I at the time, we were planning on moving back to Rwanda to work. And in our church, you raise support from congregations. There's no like mission board or anything. So a lot of people, talked to them. They read about it and they said, "Oh, that's really terrible. Where are we doing for lunch?" And we just kind of want to move on. And then I put some of these pictures in one of the talks, and people responded to those photos in a way that was like, okay, there's something to this. And back then it was still very, I was just thinking, if I get better at taking pictures, maybe I can get better at, kind of making people care about this. So that was my desire. And a few things happened. Around the same time, João Silva, who is a South African photographer for the New York Times, had gone to Lake Volta in Ghana and done a story on child slavery on the lake there. Kids whose parents can't afford to take care of them sell them to local fishermen, who put them to work on the boats at 5-6 years old, diving into the water to get nets. And so João had a photograph that appeared inside, I think it was an inside page in the New York Times, and a woman in Missouri, who was a hairdresser, was on vacation in New York at the time, saw the paper, went back home, couldn't get this kid out of her mind. And it sounds insane, but she flew to Ghana and found this kid and bought him like out of slavery and got him put in a Ghanaian orphanage. And then she did that like over and over again for 150 kids, rescuing kids from slavery because of a picture that ran, not even very large in the New York Times.
Uh-huh.
So then I thought, okay, pictures can make a difference.
Yeah.
That there's something about, it connects with people in a different way. And so I thought, okay, cool. I'm going to keep trying to learn this picture stuff. And then a guy named David Leeson, who was a photographer at the Dallas Morning News, won the Pulitzer Prize. I think it was in 2003 for his coverage of the Iraq War. He and a colleague won the prize for photography. And David was a student at the school where I was in seminary. And when you win that prize, your alma mater is going to invite you back to give a talk because, so he's invited back. And I think every photographer kind of goes through a phase where they're like, oh, war and conflict, that's like, something that they at least want to think about. And so I went to the talk and just remember, his pictures were powerful, but he talked about his career. He started out at the newspaper in Abilene, Texas, and kind of worked his way up. He went to New Orleans, went to Dallas, got to see the world. But I don't remember the content exactly of his message, except that he talked about what it meant to be a photographer in the world and what that allowed him to see and the connections it allowed him to make with people. And I just kind of remember sitting in the audience going, well, crap. I've spent all this time doing this other thing. I want to do that. I want to be a photojournalist. I don't know how. I don't know what that means, but that's what I want to do. And so I kind of set out on that road, and we can talk about that, or I don't know. Like I said, I was in seminary for a while. I have an ability to ramble on.
So when I first got out of college, actually, I didn't completely tell the truth. I spent 6 months working for the NBC affiliate in Little Rock as a videographer and an editor for them. And part of, what I did was like the weekend overnight photog, and my job in the late 90s in Little Rock. And it was when HBO was doing, documentary on gangs in New York or in Little Rock. And, my job was to stay up all night and listen to the scanner and chase police cars and find body bags. And I absolutely hated that job. Like there was nothing about it I liked. It was either just kind of dumb little stories or that. And, anyway, so that's when, and I instead of chasing police cars, I started driving one after that. And then, fast forward, I got picked up by the Methodist Church to do their stuff, and they sent me to Congo. And it was kind of a similar thing. I'd had the journalism background, but I ended up taking a lot of photos. And it was a different sort of thing, but I brought back the photos and the video and wrote a bunch of stories. And the Methodist Church is connectional. So one church is connected to all the other churches globally. And so they've got their own newswire, they've got their own stuff. And so I took some photos, shot some video, and kind of through the course of that, they weren't fully responsible, but they helped start a kind of a catalyst of raising up like hundreds of thousands of dollars to go back to Congo to build, water wells and other stuff. Because what was there was right after the Congolese Civil War. And it was literally the year after, the mass graves were getting filled, and, there's HIV was still rampant, and there's all these orphans running around, and it was kind of sort of the same sort of thing, but you put a face to that, and then suddenly you humanize it in a way that, people hadn't, written word just doesn't necessarily do. And I kind of had sort of the same kind of moment you did. I was like, oh, okay, now I get it. This is what I signed up for. And then I was kind of all in at that point. I was like, okay, this is what I'm doing now. This isn't, going to, local movie premieres at the, whatever drive-in movie. We're doing the thing I wanted to do.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah. So I get it. So tell me about the tattoo. What's the tattoo?
All right. So there's I guess a little bit of preface. There's a poet named Constantine Cavafy. There's a Greek poet living in Alexandria, Egypt, back around the turn of the century. So like the late 1800s, early 1900s. And he wrote a great poem that's kind of a retelling of the Odyssey. The poem's called Ithaca, and it is a friend of mine from my seminary days, when I was talking to him about kind of resenting the time that I had wasted doing this other kind of preparation or study, shared this poem with me, and it kind of helped completely reframe that experience. And it's a retelling of the Odyssey, which hopefully your students are aware
Mm-hmm.
of that, kind of the archetype of all Western literature. And so I mean, if Odysseus gets on a boat and sails straight home, that's like a paragraph, right? That's
Right.
a very boring story.
Right.
But the fact that it took him, years of all of these different, it was not a very linear path,
Right.
setbacks, you piss off this god, but then you get this god in favor. And the reason that story endures is because it's a hell of a story. And it's in the poem, Cavafy points out that it's the journey that makes you a wealthy person, not the it's a very cliche, but I guess because the fact that it's thousands of years old,
Mm-hmm.
makes it a little more impressive than vinyl letters on somebody's wall.
Right.
Live, laugh, love. It's not the journey. It's the journey, not the destination.
Right.
And so years ago, when I was working at Nature, their headquarters are in London, and once a year we would fly over to kind of hang out with our British colleagues. And the office was just not very far from the British Museum.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think it was either a lunch break or a day off. I went by, and you walk in the door, and there's the Rosetta Stone, which is pretty cool to see in real life. And then the British Museum has in their collection a vase, or a vase, I guess we would say, of a scene from the Odyssey. And I mean, I don't know. A lot of people think this is Jesus, which is kind of funny.
Okay.
But this vase is called the Siren Vase, and it's from there's a portion of the Odyssey where so the goddess Athena is kind of looking out for our guy,
Mm-hmm.
and says, okay, you're gonna sail past this island with these sirens, and they're these, I don't know, bird ladies, angels, whatever. They have these amazing voices, and you listen to them and they sing, and apparently it's so beautiful, all you want to do is just kind of hang out.
Right.
And then you forget to eat and you die. And so she gives a little bit of a heads up and says, take wax and shove it in your men's ears and have
Mm-hmm.
them tie you to the mast of your ship. So when you go by, they're not going to hear it. Make them promise that as much as you beg, like, no, let me go. I want to stay here, that they will tie you even tighter. And
Uh-huh.
it's an interesting story. And so there's this depiction in terracotta or whatever of Odysseus being tied to the mast of his ship with, I guess, this temptation, that he's allowed to enjoy a little bit of it, but not fall prey to it.
Right.
Because he was a little bit prepared. It helps when you have a goddess on your side, whispering in your ear. And so I remember just kind of that image, the poem that has become very kind of powerful, a reminder to me. So I kind of, in a cheesy way, got to put on my camera arm. It's a bit of a reminder that, even just kind of reciting the weird, long, twisted journey that I've taken till now, it's kind of made me who I am, and I am kind of happy with the experiences I've had, and Then basically I found a really cool tattoo guy in DC whose work I liked. And so I was like, you know what? It's time to get something done. So
I've
yeah,
always thought
the journey.
I've always thought that particular story, I thought, was just a little bit of flirting with madness. Because the side of that, and on the, everybody else stays and, they die. He hears it, achieves that level of madness, but then it gets taken away from him. So what are you left with after that?
Yeah. I guess I hadn't thought. Well, shoot, it's too late now. I'm not going to go get
No,
it.
it's not necessarily a bad thing. It's just you get that taste.
I definitely can see that. I guess I thought maybe it's a good thing to enjoy a little bit of the maybe the madness. Maybe it doesn't go that far if you just get a little taste of it. But there are things that are very distracting in life that you could say, I just want to stay here. And then maybe you wind up dying on the shore.
That sounds honestly, that just sounded like Arkansas.
Well, I guess
nobody wants to leave.
Part of another part of this, and we've known each other so long now,
right?
We can get real deep. I was born in Tennessee, just really not far from Arkansas. A lot of my mom's side of the family is actually from Arkansas originally. I went to school there. But I was born in Tennessee and moved to South Africa when I was very young. My dad is African by birth. My family left, his side of the family left the UK and Scotland back in the 1700s. Different branches went to the Cape Colony of Southern Africa long time ago.
Okay.
And so to kind of grow up around family, they up and moved us from. I was born just outside of Jackson in, all that black dirt cotton fields of West Tennessee. And then we moved over to East Tennessee up in the mountains, where I became, I guess, like a little hillbilly. Used to get my hair cut by Dolly Parton's sister.
I don't think too many people can say that.
So we went from like the mountains of East Tennessee to Southern Africa. And then I didn't come back to the U.S. until 96 for college. And so like I had these like American years and then this cultural shift of moving to South Africa when it was still under apartheid. And within a few months, I was learning Afrikaans and a bit of Zulu, and all my friends and cousins spoke. Within, I think, 6 months, I had developed a South African accent. And then because we never came back to the U.S. and kind of lost connection, because we didn't really have much family in the U.S. My mom's an only child. So all the aunts and uncles and cousins were in Africa. I really feel like I kind of had this other part of me. And then coming back to the U.S. For college, and then not going back to Africa there's a phenomenon, and it seems weird to be 40 and talk about being a kid, but I guess sociologists have termed it the third culture kid, which is a lot of missionary kids, military kids, diplomat kids,
right?
Where you grow up in a culture that's different from your parents, and you're comfortable in a lot of places, but no place is really home. Okay. And so I don't know if that's one of the things that sort of appealed to me as a journalist. Like I have moved around so many times and I can be comfortable in a lot of places. But when somebody's like, so where are you from? I always have to ask, like, how much time do we have? Because that's such a loaded question. And the whole point of the Odyssey is this guy trying to get home. And so then I think a lot about what does that mean for me who doesn't, I guess maybe I'm looking for that. I don't know if I'll ever find that, but just this idea of being on a journey, trying to get somewhere, whether that's home or just the next port of call.
Now, how many years?
Sometimes you get.
How many years were you in Africa?
Go ahead.
How many years were you in South Africa?
9.
9. And
9.
How old were you during those years?
9 to 18.
Okay, so those are formative years.
It feels that way.
Okay, yeah, I'm trying to.
Yeah.
It's one thing when people are like, "Oh yeah, I was
Yeah.
there for when I was 3, and we moved when I was 7." But yeah, those are formative teenage years.
No, I'm the only person in America, I think I know my age, who's drunk from a whites only drinking fountain. In high school, we had a class or an activity called cadets where we were taught to march and drill. And there was a firing range on campus because you were expected to do 2 years in the military as a white male. They had national service. And so, when I got to college in Arkansas and would talk to my friends, I realized my growing up experience was very different from theirs in a lot of ways.
No, you're South African.
Big cultural gaps.
Were you're on like the southern coast of like around the Cape in that area, or were you more like Joe?
We were on the eastern side of the country. The main city was called Durban. Huge port city. I lived inland, a little town called Pietermaritzburg, which was fun to learn to spell. That's where Gandhi got thrown off the train and kind of started his activism. So yeah, fun part of the country to grow up in back then.
When we were going to Congo, we would stop and we'd always fly in through South Africa, and we stayed in Joburg for like a week each time, just to acclimate yourself to the time. Was, it was post-apartheid, but we did go to the apartheid museum while we were there, and then we went to what was that? There's a slum. That was an eye-opening experience. Soweto, yeah. And we went to it was a Catholic church in the middle of Soweto, where there's a Black Madonna painting is, and it was kind of I guess it's the closest thing to your Rwanda story, but they'd left all the bullet holes because that's where like Desmond Tutu would hold rallies or meetings. And I remember because we were staying at the Holiday Inn. So for those who don't know, like in South Africa, like that was you either are driving a BMW or you're living in a slum. There's compounds. They put broken glass.
And they're right next to each other.
Yeah, and they're right next to each other. Every big house has a wall around it with like broken glass or spikes or something sticking out the top. And I'm me being me. I made friends with like the cleaning staff at the hotel, and so I started talking to them because I was curious. And they're like, no, we can't talk to you while we're at work. And then I remember asking like, well, can I like meet you for dinner or something? And I can. And they're all black, and they're like, nope. And I went because they didn't want to be seen with a white person outside. Not that they didn't want to, is they were just afraid of the repercussions of it. And I just thought this is a world that doesn't exist where I am right now, at least in the same. Not anymore. Like I kept thinking this is probably what it was like in the 50s or 60s in the United States. So, so I can imagine you coming from that and then coming to Arkansas.
The culture shock was massive coming this way. A lot of people assumed moving to Africa was tough. But, I mean, when you're a kid, you're resilient. I adapted pretty quickly. Coming back, though, I remember going to Walmart and there were, 2 aisles of cereal. Like, I think we had 3 cereals growing up. It was like cornflakes and some oat thing, and then like rice. And so like, I think a lot of folks who go to Africa for whatever reason on a lot of mission trips or youth trips, they come back and you're just kind of confronted with kind of the affluence of this country and how much we have. And so, culture shock was much more coming back this way than moving over there.
A friend of mine from Congo came here and he couldn't buy toothpaste. He tried to go to Walmart and buy toothpaste. Same reason. He couldn't make a decision because he'd never seen
50 toothpastes. Yeah. It's on the other side. It's so hard to convince folks, some folks in Rwanda, or I've spent a lot of time in Kenya and Uganda, Tanzania.
Mm-hmm.
They refuse to believe that there are poor people in America. That not everybody in America has a big house and a car and is wealthy.
Right.
And to an extent that's true. But then you tell them like, no, we've got a massive homeless population, and you're like, nah, you're pulling my leg. There's no way there's poor people in America.
Right.
Which, I mean, I think maybe that's one of the things that appeals to me about journalism is this. It's a way to maybe kind of build bridges and connect people, and maybe lofty goal of fostering an increased understanding of our world and the people who live in it. On a good day, I think those are the motivations.
Okay, I want to hit something just so I don't forget. Who knows who's going to watch this or listen to it? But I know my students are because I'm going to assign it. What advice would you give to a young journalist right now? One of the things that I run into a lot with my kids, and they're not kids, my students, is this sort of idea that they're going to Arkansas Tech or they're going to some Division II school in sort of a rural area. And they're going back to the idea of working for a small local paper, the local network affiliate, and they think that's all they're ever going to be able to do. For a lot of them, like the idea that they could work at the New York Times or take photos for the AP never crosses their mind. So what would you say to them?
Oh, goodness. So many things. So I think an interesting discussion is whether journalism is a profession or a craft. I think some of the best photographers and people I've known never got a degree. They just they knew how to write, or they learned how to they learned how to do the job and could do it. The degree didn't matter. On the reverse side, I know folks who have a graduate degree from top journalism school. Doesn't mean they know what they're doing.
Mm-hmm.
So there's not necessarily a correlation between someone's education and experience and their ability to do the job. So focus on doing good work wherever you are. That some of the best stories or the stuff that I had the most fun doing was for this little local paper. I think it was a 30,000 circulation on Sunday.
Mm-hmm.
Covered a town of 120,000 people. But man, things like we had a recipe of the week where you'd get to go meet somebody who made an amazing 4-cheese macaroni.
Uh-huh.
And you write up the silly story, but and I sent you the picture of the egg.
I was just I'm waiting for the moment to go. Let's talk about the egg.
So I mean, wherever you are, whatever opportunity you find, amazing stories, important stories to be told. If local news is probably more important now than maybe ever before, with the death of local newspapers and stuff like that, like being a part of a community, knowing the issues that face it and having access to those people, that is going to be important. And so, aspiring to the New York Times or the Washington, some big journalism outlet, that can be good. But I think, don't aim to be at the New York Times, aim to do work of a quality that gets you noticed and might lead to an opportunity. I don't know if that makes sense, but
it does.
Don't say you want to work at the New York Times just to work at the New York Times. Do work that I think there used to be a pipeline. You'd start at a small newspaper and then go you're wherever you are in Arkansas, and then maybe you get on the Little Rock paper. Right. And in the Little Rock paper, you do well and you get noticed, and maybe you go to Memphis, and then maybe you get picked up. I think that's largely disappeared, just because the newspapers in that pipeline have disappeared. But doing good work, and then honestly, maybe we can talk about imposter syndrome.
Absolutely.
And I'm not going to say that I'm not an asshole, but I remember in Missouri, a guy named Brian Storm came and he gave a talk. He's an alum. He'd gone on and done amazing things at big outlets. Started his own multimedia company. I remember he talked in the class, and I think there was maybe 50 of us, and he said, "Don't be an asshole. It's a small industry, and some of you in this room will wind up working for other people in this room, and so like." Be a good person. And I think along with that, like be interesting, read books, know about things other than journalism or photography, if these are specifically photo students. Nobody wants to talk to a photographer about f-stops and shutter speeds. And some of the folks that I think I've met get so into that, the technical parts of stuff, that they could rattle off all the specs of the latest Nikon DSLR. Like, what's the last book you read? So like, be curious about the world, and then work hard, tell good stories, and be a good person. Talk, offer a hand when you can, and pay it back, pay it forward as much as you can. That's the only thing I can think that helped me land where I am, was just also pure dumb luck doesn't hurt.
So how did you? You've got a pretty impressive resume. Is that I don't know, CV, whatever we want to call it.
Sure.
You started out at Abilene, but then if you look, you're like, oh, but you also worked on the world's toughest race, and you did all these other things, and it's like, where did you make that jump?
Okay. This is gonna. A large part of this is like it's still a mystery to me. Like I still feel very lucky to have made some of the connections, and I think it comes down to that, to connections, and to making them, to sustaining them, not for their own sake. In grad school at the University of Missouri, I think there was a bit of a distaste for networking. Some people just didn't like the idea that you couldn't just get by on the quality of your work.
Right.
I think some people naively think if I just go and do really great work, it'll get noticed. And it's like, that's just not the case. I mean, maybe for some people it is. And so one of the great things about the program at Mizzou is that they bring in all of these experts for their kind of extracurriculars. They host the Photographer Pictures of the Year International Competition, Missouri Photo Workshop, College Photographer of the Year. And so, pre-COVID, they would bring people in. So like POI goes on for 2 or 3 weeks, and you've got these judges who are like senior editors at National Geographic and the New York Times and the Washington Post, and they come to campus. And if you volunteer to like run a computer and click a button, at the end of the day, the director's like, hey, come grab a beer with us. And you go out and you have hamburgers and beer late at night with like, okay, shit, there's 8 Pulitzer. I don't know if I can say that on a podcast. You can say, but there's like 8 Pulitzer Prize winners.
Yeah.
and you're just talking. And I think some people, maybe this goes back to like 10 years of ministry training. Like you learn to talk to people and be interested in them as human beings, not what they can do for you.
Right.
There's a guy, Emilio Morinati, is an AP photographer in Spain. Amazing photographer. He came out to judge one year, and we're in line, like getting coffee early one morning. And we just talked about, work, life. Did he miss his family back in Spain? All those. I think there's a way you can do that. And you're like, I want to get Emilio Morinati's business card so that I can get a job from him someday.
Right.
Or you appreciate getting to learn something about a part of the world you don't know about. Like, so there's a way to make connections that is gross and is very off-putting, the tacky side of networking.
When you start fanboying, just, yeah.
Yeah. But just, this goes back, I think, to being curious about the world and wanting to, meeting people. So I had 2 degrees in religion and theology, and I was living in Abilene, Texas. And I had this kind of desire to do something with it.
Mm-hmm.
I probably called the paper, I emailed, I was like, I want to do this. Nothing. Wound up playing church league softball with a guy who used to be the sports writer at the paper. And he would write up blog posts like he was covering our church league softball team for the newspaper, would write these great game stories with stats. And I said, oh, I'll contribute some photography. This is kind of what I want. And he was like, oh, let me talk to, he connected me with the woman who gave me my first assignment at the newspaper.
Mm-hmm.
So like church league softball to the New York Times is really not that indirect a route, but like,
Right.
So I got that first assignment, and my former boss at the creative agency that I was working at before this said sometimes you just fake it till you make it. And so I might have oversold my experience. Like I had all the enthusiasm. I was like, oh yes, I'm a photographer,
You're self-identifying as a photographer.
I got sent to cover a luncheon at the Chamber of Commerce, I think.
Uh-huh.
I think I filed 300 pictures, and there wasn't a photo editor, so I just sent all these pictures to one of the photographers, and he's like, "What the hell are you doing?" And then the photographer was like, "Where are your cut lines?" And I had to Google like, "What is a cut line?" I knew nothing, but the thrill of seeing my first 2-column photo in print, and then I got a check. I think I made $40 on that first assignment. And then I was like, send me to anything. I was working a full-time job at the university, but I said, this is what I want to do. I worked nights, I worked weekends. Basically, like as soon as I would log off, I told them I was available for anything. I covered stock shows. I covered anything they would send me to. I worked as hard as I could. The staff at the paper were absolutely instrumental. Like they taught me how to be a journalist. And so for years, like they taught me how to write. The first reporting assignment I got, I had to go cover a school board meeting. And I'd never written a news story before. I didn't know about inverted pyramid or anything. So I just wrote this happened and then this happened and then this happened. And the editor was like, oh my God, it's going to take hours to like wrangle this into something. But then I learned and tried to do better the next time. And I kind of became like a permalancer. And then a position opened up. They had a fellowship or something. One of the other thing that I will mention, it really helps if people get pregnant because most of the jobs that I've gotten have been covering for people on maternity leave. So one of the photographers at the Abilene paper went on maternity leave, and that opened a spot for a few months. So I did that, and then that led to a staff job. And eventually I realized that with 2 degrees in ministry or theology, that might be my ceiling, just because I didn't know enough. It was so busy. There were some days where I'd have 7 or 8 bylines in the paper, writing, shooting. It was nuts. And I felt like I wasn't improving. So going back to networking and contacts, this friend of mine named Ron Erdrich, who's still at the paper in Abilene, said, there's this workshop in Missouri you should check out called the Missouri Photo Workshop. It's been going on for a long time. They really teach you how to tell stories with pictures. And I applied, and I swear my application portfolio must have been, it was nothing but like crappy high school football pictures and some fires. But I think Ron wrote me a letter to the, you had to have I guess kind of somebody to vouch for you or recommend you. And I got accepted to the workshop. And so I went, it was September of 2011, went to this little town in Missouri, and I got put on a team with Craig Walker, who was, at that time, he'd only won 1 Pulitzer Prize. He was a photographer in Denver. And yeah. And then Chris Wilkins, who was like a senior photo editor at the Dallas Morning News. And so for a week, those 2 guys looked at every frame that I made and kind of helped coach me and guide the story that I was trying to tell. And I remember like on a Wednesday, and the workshop, it's intense. It's a whole thing, which I love dearly and would recommend to anybody. But you're going on no sleep. It's intense. And I remember Wednesday night just kind of like, you guys, should I keep barking up this tree, or should I give up and like go back to writing and, being a reporter? And they said, you could do this if you want to. And that little bit of like positive encouragement, found out through the workshop that I could attend graduate school at the University of Missouri basically for free. That they had, I'm not sure what the status is now, but they had really generous assistantships and fellowships.
Mm-hmm.
And so back when those were still a thing, I quit my newspaper job to go to graduate school. That was possible because I was married to someone in the medical field at the time.
Mm-hmm.
Without her support, it probably would have been much more difficult to like make that jump, to go back to school at 34. But I knew that it was an important next step. I wanted to I wanted to teach someday, so I knew I needed that credential. But mostly, I wanted to know about this field that I saw myself in. I wanted to know the history and the ethics. I had that nerdy bent to me. So I went to that school and learned so much. I went in planning to be a photographer, and a friend of mine said, I know you want to be a photographer, but just take the picture editing class, because that will help you learn how editors think, and that'll make you a better photographer. And from the first week in that class, I was like, oh, this is what I want to do. And I kind of know my ceiling as a photographer, and in this role, getting to work with photographers, to be in a newsroom and to be an advocate for visual journalism, and to understand the stories we're trying to tell and get the photographers in the best spot to tell that. Like it felt like a much better fit for my personality, for my goals.
Mm-hmm.
And so, as part of my going to school and my scholarship package, I got to be the co-director of that Missouri photo workshop, my last year in grad school. And while I was there, I met Marianne Golan, who was the director of photography at the Washington Post. And same thing, go back to the small town in Missouri, and we're doing stories. And I remember we would talk about picture editing and what we liked about it. And I made this connection, which led to my first job in DC. And then that met people in DC, and that led to my next contract editing job. And then I met other photographers and other editors, and just, kind of developed that network and made friends with people in the industry, so that when the job at Nature, the science journal, came up, a friend recommended me to the person that was hiring. I don't know if I would have even applied to that job unless she had like reached out and said, oh, I know this guy and he's hiring, and the job sounds pretty cool. And that job led me to, eventually I got burned out on science journalism and left the country for a little bit. And then I came back, and then networking got me in touch with Corey Rich, who was running this company out in Lake Tahoe, and getting connected to him through mutual friends. That led to that job. And then when that job ended, reached out to other people. So it's like the network is really important, but you got to do it in a way that's not just sort of transactional. Be interested in people. Yeah.
I really felt that sting. So I've been teaching, it's year 14. One of the problems, I'll call it a problem, it's a trap with working in academia, is universities are bubbles. And it's real easy to get into sort of a routine of, I teach these classes in the fall semester, I teach these classes in the spring semester, or make updates, and life just, and you work in that environment, that institution. And then the thing that you originally set out to do sort of goes on autopilot, and I see it so many with a lot of faculty members is, and I saw it in the church too, people get really focused on the institution rather than the thing the institution was designed to do. And so from journalism, so I kind of got burned out a few years ago, and I was like, okay, it was one of those, I sort of checked off a lot of like life accomplishment boxes. I'm like, I've done this. Oh crap, I'm out of dreams. I don't know what I want to do now. And so I did what any reasonable human being is. I bought a boat, and So and then I moved to South Texas for the summer, and it like literally 2 weeks after I got down there is when everything blew up on the border with the Trump's new immigration policy. And I had taken my camera gear down with me because I was like, I'm going to just do a little cute documentary about guys and their boats. I'm just going to interview because every guy has a story about his boat, and I'm going to do that. And then I was like, oh shit, I'm 2 hours away from the biggest story in the country right now. And I have absolutely no reason not to. I have a passport and I have no reason not to go. So I just drove down there. And it just so happened there's a bunch of Democrat congressmen were having a press conference. And I had my camera. It fits in with all the other professional cameras. And, and I just walked in. And just sat down like I belonged. I didn't have any press credentials. I didn't have anything. I just sort of walked in and nobody asked me any questions. And I was realized like, oh yeah, there's all of these other news agencies around me. And I don't know anybody because I started, and then, I ended up doing some good networking within that world. And I thought, I've got all these great stories and I don't know a single person to pitch them to. Without just going in completely blind. And I just remember thinking, yeah, this is my own fault. I should, I spent a lot of time focusing on the story, but I didn't have a place to put it. I've got my own website, and YouTube, but,
Yeah. I mean, that is one of the frustrations of any profession. I saw this in seminary. They talk about the town and ground divide between, you have people that when you get really into academia, that comes with its own set of pressures to research and publish and write and go to conferences, which means maybe you step out of ministry. And if you want to do full-time ministry, you're not doing hardcore research and getting published. And so it's hard to keep a foot in both worlds.
Right.
And that's one thing I liked about the 2 years I spent in Missouri was I got to scratch that academic itch. I mean, I wrote a thesis on the 5 layers of gatekeeping forces facing picture editors. And I got to do like actual academic, research, but I also got to go out and photograph and edit and put out a daily paper. Now, since leaving, it's so hard because you either are a journalist and you do that 60 hours a week or more.
Right.
Like right now, there is no way I could do research or writing on a scholarly level. Folks who get into, working in J schools, you probably experience this. I don't know if it's a teaching university or not, but like you got to, if you want tenure, which means you want to be more than an adjunct, working for pennies, you got to produce a certain amount of scholarly content, which means maybe you're not running out to do the fun story. You are, I probably spent more time in the library in grad school for photojournalism than I did actually producing journalism. But that was because for that period, that's what I was focused on. Right now, I keep in touch with some of my professors from back then, and I try to, see if a paper comes out that might be relevant. Sometimes there'll be something about eye tracking studies and cognition or perception that is kind of mildly interesting, but it's kind of thing that I would read like while waiting at a doctor's office. It's not right. It's really hard to do full-time journalism and full-time academics at the same time. I don't know if anybody's doing it.
Right. Not well, probably.
Maybe. Yeah. I mean, when I was in DC, I taught at the University of Maryland for a couple of semesters, and I loved it because I got to do my full-time job. And don't tell the people at Maryland this, but I probably would have done it for free because I got to teach this course. They don't have a photo program, but once a week I got to go up there and talk photojournalism with young, eager students for 3 hours a week and watch them grow and develop and talk, about photography and what makes it good. And it was just like that was kind of giving me life while I had this job that was I don't know, I didn't love it toward the end. It was a lot of drudgery, and yet, but that's sort of like academic light, like diet academics. Teaching a practical skills course was a lot of fun, but it's yeah.
That was
I used
actually
that for like my mad money for my motorcycle. It was not a career.
that was my inroad into teaching. Actually, is they had a one of their professors left, and they needed someone to teach the multimedia practicum. And at that point, I was sort of the cool graduate because I had a cool job, and they would bring me in to do those little things. And they're like, but I was also local, and they're like, hey, can you teach this one class? It's 1 hour a week. And I'm like, yeah, because college professor, I could be, I can wear tweed.
I got the leather patches,
right? I can do all this stuff, and then it turned into, hey, can you also teach the speech class, and can you also do these things? And
right?
But it worked out for me.
And then you got to join committees, and
well, it worked out because the economy crashed right then, and so did all my contracts because I was freelancing, and then I was like, I could use insurance, and so it turned into like a visiting position, and then just went on from there. So no, I get it.
Man, that just for your students, it's out there on the internet somewhere. But a few years ago, another grad student and we did a survey on particularly photojournalists in the U.S. And I mean, I think real talk, the economics of the news industry is a huge issue.
Yeah.
A few years back, I don't know, maybe 4 or 5 years now, the New York Times published a piece on their Lens blog, an older photographer saying everything is terrible, everything sucks, rates are bad, and there's never been a worse time to be a photographer. Okay. The next day or a couple of days later, they published like a counterpoint from a young woman who had gone like from school directly to the New York Times and was getting to do all these cool video projects. And she's like, no, there's never been a better time to be in this field, and it's amazing. And so Josh Bickle and I, who's a staff photographer in Columbus, Ohio, it was during March Madness. We're chatting one day, and we're like, okay, University of Missouri teaches, to research and try to put some data behind something. So let's do a survey and try to get at, what's it really, what is the reality of the situation? And so we kind of, I think maybe we'd both taken qualitative research at Mizzou, so we didn't know what we were doing, trying to put numbers together. But we came up with a survey using Google Docs to just ask people anonymously, like, how much money are you making? And then we're like, are you a man or a woman? You black, white, Asian, Hispanic? Where do you live? And then, like, do you have other sources of income? And it was staggering. We thought we might get a few dozen responses from our friends. We put it out online. I think we had to close it when we got like 1,400 responses. And then we were like, oh, crap, what do we do with this? Luckily, somebody we went to school with was a Pulitzer winner for data journalism at the Orlando newspaper.
Yep.
So we called Charles and we're like, hey, dude, if we buy you a bottle of whiskey, will you crunch these numbers? I don't know, like whatever number people do. Like, can you make sense of this for us? And he put it in some program and basically spit out all of these kind of findings. And it was staggering that the industry was really, if you'd been at this for 30 years and were at a union newspaper, you were probably doing okay. Or you were a 22, 23-year-old college grad living in an apartment with 5 other people. Like there's not a lot of middle class in photojournalism, it looked like.
Right.
And the number of people who, we would joke about the trust fund babies. But there are a lot. I mean, and I'm not a trust fund kid, but like I would not have been able to have this career if it hadn't been for my ex-wife, like putting me through grad school. Like her job paid our bills while I was in school. A lot of people are out there and they're hustling, but they're being supported by a spouse or a partner or a parent or family money, way more than I think we were willing to talk about.
Right.
And so, I mean, the economics of it that's another reality that just as opportunities shrink, starting off at a small newspaper, I think my first newspaper job, I might've made $28,000 a year. and that's just not sustainable. Like,
No.
so as you know, yeah, it's not, I don't want to like paint an overly rosy picture. If you just work hard and keep your nose clean, things will work out. I mean,
Yeah, that's the
I
thing.
know a lot of talented photographers who are selling insurance right now.
I Yeah, I know. I met one on the border who's given a TED talk and is, occasionally kind of just reaching out asking for money. Um, and that's just sort of the world that we're in right now.
Yeah.
It's admittedly, I've hit this sort of point in my career, like where I've now have a lot of time off. And so honestly, at this point, I thought, you know what? I really have the best of both worlds. If I can teach right now, but I have a lot of time off, now's the time if I really wanted to dive in. And I hate to say this, it's because I can afford to do it. Like I have my bills covered.
Oh yeah.
And so it's not that I want to do it for fun, but I'm not constantly worried about can I pay the light bill this month?
You know, I really wish people would talk more, just in general, about money and salary stuff. Early on in the early days of COVID, we were having a lot of Zoom hangouts,
Mm-hmm.
and there was a young woman who's a photographer in New Orleans, and we got on there, and everybody, had a glass of wine, a couple of beers, and we basically like bullied her into opening a 401k because we realized that's not something she'd heard in school.
Right.
And so you had all these older, crusted people being like, you got to save for retirement. There's a couple of websites out there, I think, called like Who Pays Photographers.
Mm-hmm.
We should talk about rates and, the expectation. I think if there was more transparency around that, at least it just gives people more realistic perspective of the economics of this and whether that's something that they want to do, or because I have a friend who teaches at Ohio State, and he's on a 9-month contract, I guess. And so he teaches, it takes 3 months, and he's got his bills covered. So then he goes and does whatever he wants.
Right.
And that's like, I know a lot of other photographers in journalism who will do commercial work to pay the bills to do the stories that they really care about. They'll take pictures of some, for whatever, some weird ad, or they'll shoot weddings or portraits because, like, I mean, shoot, a law firm in DC, I once made more doing headshots for their people than like a month of assignments. And so you take that money and you're like, okay, that I can buy a plane ticket to Southern Africa to go do this thing on rhinos or whatever.
Let's segue this, because this brings up a question of fairness is not really. I think basically what I want to do is rub salt on wounds right now. Let's talk about Instagram and influencers and the money that they can make doing what they do, and then you compare that to this is the thing. I just remember I felt the hair on the back of my neck stand up. I was actually, of all things, I was getting a tattoo a couple of weeks ago, and my tattoo artist is a super interesting guy. He's kind of like you. He's been all over. He's a former Marine. He's just like he looks like he could kill you, but he also, when he talks, he sounds like he has a PhD. But he was talking about doing a tattoo for one of his clients, and she was now she was an Instagram girl and had her own like OnlyFans thing going. And she told him she made like $1,200 that morning taking pictures of her feet. And I kept thinking, life's not fair. Life's not fair.
Nope. No. I mean, well, the fact that the Kardashians have more money than Trump, like yes, there are massive inequities. And yeah, Instagram is a whole weird thing for sure. Like all social media, I think it distorts reality. I'm looking, my buddy Craig Walker, who's now at the Boston Globe, has at least 2 Pulitzer Prizes that he's won. He's been a finalist like, talk about like an excellent visual storyteller. He has 2,100 followers on Instagram.
Right.
Which seem like, are you kidding me? But then, like, yes, somebody, if you're a cute blonde, you could have 30,000. And I mean, a lot of these are bots, but or for instance, I was living in DC and got to go to the White House as part of some Instagram trip.
Mm-hmm.
And I had interacted some, I think, with Pete Souza before then.
Mm-hmm.
And Pete, is a celebrity photographer.
Right.
And I had this picture because Pete and I were talking a little bit about, I don't know, the ridiculousness of all of this.
Mm-hmm.
And I took a picture of him being posed by all these other Instagram people.
Uh-huh.
And I looked, like, my Instagram followers jumped up by 1,000 people because Pete Souza was in my picture.
Yeah.
I was like, these folks are going to be really disappointed when they realize that mostly it's stuff I bake and weird stuff that I see.
Uh-huh.
So, I mean, that to me, like, follower counts, it's completely arbitrary and artificial and does not matter. And I've heard that they're thinking about, like, stripping away likes, like not letting people see that, which I think would be huge. I mean, I'm not gonna lie, like, there's that ego boost, that little dopamine hit when you see ooh, somebody liked my picture. That's great. But it doesn't matter. Like, it doesn't mean you're doing anything that's important or good. You can be a cute person doing a weird dance and it'll get 1 million views.
Right.
So what? Like, and the money is just, I don't know if you watch that, what was it called? The Social Dilemma?
Yeah, I did.
Just the money advertisers are putting into this to sell us to each other is just bizarre. That's what I mean. Like, I'll Instagram. I like the followers and the likes and all that, but also I'm like, here's a weird thing that I saw. Like, I don't take it seriously enough to try to
I was
become a celebrity at it.
I don't really see you being the person who's working on your grid on Instagram, just trying to make it that absolute perfect.
Oh,
on Instagram, if I get 15 likes on Instagram, I'm happy. I'm like, all right, I did something right. 15 people liked it. So,
I mean, it kind of helps that, I mean, I'll brag a little bit. Like, I have some pretty cool followers. And so when I see, like, oh, that person liked it, like, that makes me feel all right. Like, when some of the people I admire in the industry, like, that's a good picture. Yeah. Like, I'd rather have that one like than 15,000 Russian bots or idiots going, "Ooh, that's some cool bread." Now, I mean, have fun with it.
Now, do you, if somebody's been in there for a while, and now, when somebody, I would imagine you're at the point that people are trying to network with you. Like, are you getting young people sending you their Instagram and going, "Hey, check out my photos," or is that no, not so much?
I mean, on the one hand, like, one thing I love about being an editor is that it's a lot, mostly anonymous. Like, we don't have our bylines and stuff.
Right.
I do put it on, like, my LinkedIn or my profile, because, like, if I reach out to somebody, like, who's this guy I've never heard of? And it's like, oh, he's a picture editor somewhere. They will return your call or whatever. Right. I get pitches from people I know, or that I meet, like, at workshops or portfolio reviews. I get a lot of weird pitches from people in India who think photo editing is cutting out things for ads. Oh, yeah. Like, I suck at Photoshop. So they're offering me their clipping services. And I'm like, yeah. But yeah, I'm just reminded of a story about kind of maybe the bad way of doing networking. Okay. And so every year, National Geographic has a photo seminar, like a couple of days where they bring in, I think it started where they would bring in all their staff photographers to talk about the projects they're working on that year. And it's a cool event. It's at National Geographic headquarters, and you get to hang out and see cool talks. And then there's these happy hours afterwards, which are always fun. And you just get to like meet some of your photographic heroes. And I had moved to DC. So this would have been January, the seminars in January. So I'd been there for a few months. I'd been editing at the Post for a little while. And a friend of mine, who is a Pulitzer-winning photographer, but that's like secondary. She's a fantastic human being, like just a good person. We were talking and hanging out, and we go up to this table of photographers. And luckily, or over time, I've like blocked out who they were. But she was trying to introduce me around, like, this is my friend Greg. And we were all kind of like, cool, nice to meet you. And then like looking over my shoulder, like, who's more important that I should go talk to?
Oh yeah.
And it's like, that's fine. Like, that doesn't hurt my feelings. So we walk around and we're still talking, and we wound up back at that table with all these people still talking around. And she mentioned, she's like, I really like that project that you guys published a couple of weeks ago, or that week. And the people at the table perked up and they were like, what's that? She's like, yeah, Greg is the foreign picture editor at the Washington Post, and they just did this story. And it was like
Suddenly
a switch got flipped.
Suddenly you were important to them.
And cards started coming out, and so like, now I'm the most interesting guy in the world. These people that didn't have 10 seconds for me 20 minutes ago, now like, oh, this guy might give me work. And it was just like, oh, I'm never hiring any of these people. Because that's just so gross. But I mean, maybe older and wiser now, like, it's a hustle, and there's always going to be that kind of, like, it's a little bit necessary. Still, I think there's a way to do it without being a weird, off-putting person about it. But I did notice, like, when I left DC and kind of quit being an editor for a while and just buggered off to Spain, likes on my Instagram went way down. So then you kind of wonders, like, does so and so really like my picture, or are they just throwing me a like so that
they're attaching?
That's it's like, it's so arbitrary, and you can't put any real stock in it. But I mean, if you can sell pictures of your feet and make a ton of money, and then go do a story on orphans on the border, like, more power to you.
Exactly. I just don't know what to do with that. Okay, so here's a question I want to ask everyone who actually works in the industry. These days, especially in Texas, well, no, it's even in Arkansas. I'll do boat charters, and they're like, "You do this full time?" No, not full time. I teach journalism, I'm a journalist. And then, especially in this day and age, you tell somebody you're a journalist, and then you sort of brace for impact. What? And and I've had these conversations with people. They're like, "There's no good journalism in the world," and I'm like, "Bullshit! There's lots of good journalism in the world. You just don't see it because you're getting," kind of going back to that social dilemma stuff. You're just getting inundated with a bunch of stuff that looks like it, but it isn't. And we can blame the algorithms or your own personal political bias or whatever. There's good stuff. There's really good people doing work out there. You just have to know where to go get it. So you're somebody who sees a lot of work from a lot of places. What is your, I don't want to say diagnosis, but what would you say the temperature of journalism is right now in the world?
I'm biased, but I think there's incredible journalism being done, and I have people in my own family who will call the New York Times fake news, and all of it's fake news, and how can you trust this, and everything's slanted. And what I tell them my own personal experience, like, having been inside those organizations, and you learn about the structures and the processes. And then you learn the people, like, you actually work alongside these colleagues, and you learn that you can trust them, and you trust, like, there's a structure, right? It was interesting with I think it was the tax stuff or something. People kept making a huge deal about these anonymous sources. And we don't talk about, like, what a problem media literacy is in this country. People don't know how to consume news.
Right.
But it's like, that doesn't mean they're not known. An anonymous source, of course the reporter knows who it is, and probably their editor and a couple of layers above that know exactly who this person is. They're just not naming them. It's not some idiot calling up me like, "I got dirt." I mean, I would say Donald Trump himself has been an anonymous source at the White House for a number of articles. But people see that and they're like, you can't trust it. And it's like, well, I know the process and I know the structure that says, like, for instance, at the New York Times, every story that is published has to have at least 2 sets of editors' eyes on it. So, and then seeing the back channel discussions about, is this accurate? Is this right? And every journalist I've known and have worked with wants to get it right more than anything. They want to understand and get it right and tell the truth and communicate that, because that's important. So it's my bias is towards trusting the journalists that I've worked with, and especially at the places that I have sort of some inside knowledge of, because I know how the sausage is made. And in that sense, like, I trust the sausage makers, so I can trust the sausage.
So
But man, there's also a whole lot of bad stuff out there, and being a smarter media consumer, I think, is the only way to combat that. Because, like you mentioned, algorithms, the data. I mean, you're up against supercomputers trying to program you, and the only way you can fight against that is to make your own choices and to seek out stuff, not just consume what's put in your path.
what do you think is the biggest thing that people who are outside of journalism but think they understand it don't get? Like, what's the thing that they're not seeing?
Oh man, I would say, well, they don't understand necessarily the processes of fact checking, of verifying, of getting things from multiple sources. And then the biggest difference, and I think cable TV and any newspaper or website could do a better job of highlighting the difference between news and opinion. And I think people conflating those two, I think that might lead to a lot of the assumptions of bias. Well, of course, that columnist is biased. That's their job. They are paid to have a point of view and to get it across. News is different. That it's produced differently, and because, I guess, to overplay the analogy, because people don't know how the sausage is made, they think that they're consuming something that is probably very different from what they are actually consuming.
I think a lot of what
a
lot of what they see is coming from social media, and the thing that the social media feeds from just about every mainstream publication, though, are heavily, opinion pieces. It's very, because they get more clicks, and they don't understand that if you actually go to the actual website, they're going to see more like straight line news.
Now, I do think, and I'm not. Another thing I think a lot of people don't understand is that there are usually pretty strong dividing walls between sort of the editorial part of a newsroom and the business side. So the part that's selling ads and wondering about how to make money, there's usually a pretty strong great wall between that and the people who actually produce the news. And so this idea, I guess I would push back a little bit. The idea of clickbait, I don't know that a lot of places out there are actually making money off of the fractions of a penny that somebody gets if they click on a headline. The headline is designed to capture your attention, drive you to take the story, and then ideally you're like, you know what? I trust this organization to keep doing good work. I'm going to subscribe.
Right.
And that's the revenue I think most places are taking. Now, you've probably got a bunch of shitty websites who are absolutely just click farming and trying to, because they have like maybe one person, or it's a server farm or they're subsidized by a foreign government, that all they want is the traffic. And then you see these crappy ads and, a story divided over 8 pages, so you have to click and all that artificial. But I don't think you see a lot of serious news outlets doing bullshit like that. That, yes, at the New York Times, there will be discussions about the headline to optimize it for search engines, but not because you click on it's like, woohoo, we made another half a penny.
Right.
It's to get you to read that story, and then within that story, all these other stories we've done on that topic to try to expand your understanding of it, to give a fuller picture of whatever the story is. And then you go, you know what? This is worth my $4 a month. I'm going to subscribe. I think, but it's also really easy to dismiss. Oh, they just want to sensationalize and they just want my clicks. And I'm like, maybe the bad ones do. But again, like, don't just consume the stuff that's in your feed, because again, like you mentioned, the opinion pieces are the ones that are going to, that's going to stir people up.
Right.
That's the stuff that's more divisive. It gets shared more easily because you're either angry about it, you want somebody else to be angry about it. And, the other news sometimes is not that exciting. I mean, we did a story that I thought was pretty fun about the way these lizards in Southern California, some of their mating practices. It's a fun little visual story about lizards. Compared to Trump paid off a porn star for sex, like those are entirely different universes of engagement away from each other.
Right.
And so, yeah, which of those is going to appear in your newsfeed more often? Or an opinion piece from some opinion columnist telling you Trump is a good person or a bad person or do this or that, versus here's how some interesting lizards mate in Southern California. Things are going to be put in your way because of these computers that want to sell you more stuff.
Let me jump on something real quick. Which it sparked a question I had. So for those who don't know, I mean, you're currently working for the New York Times, but you're not in New York. You're actually hanging out in Lubbock. You're in Lubbock, Texas right now, right?
I'm in Lubbock, Texas. Yep.
Okay.
Got my Topo Chico and my we're getting an HEB at the end of this month. So I'm very excited.
Man, I say the two greatest things about South Texas have been HEB and Stripes. I don't know if
Stripes.
Stripes gas station. I've never found tacos that good at a gas station in all my life.
Oh,
but
yeah.
Anyway, one of the arguments that I've heard in the past is that you just can't trust, like, let's say the New York Times or the Washington Post, because we'll use New York Times. Well, they're in New York and they're in their own bubble and they don't know what life is like out here in good old flyover state West Texas. How do you feel about that? I mean, I guess in the world of COVID, everything's changed.
It is. I mean, I definitely think there's some critique to that. That's weird. I just got a notification that we're detecting background noise from your microphone. Everything sound okay on your side?
Sounds fine to me.
Okay, I will ignore that then.
Okay.
I think there's definitely some critique to be had there. A lot of times people will criticize kind of the elite nature
right.
Because it goes back to that pipeline. I would not have made the connections that I made in my career if I hadn't gone to University of Missouri, which I think some people would argue is the best journalism school in the country. I think that's debatable, but a lot of folks at the Times are Ivy League educated, and there's a certain I think there's an importance attached to that sometimes that it's not always merited. Just because somebody went to Harvard, they're probably a smart person, but that doesn't mean that they're better at what they do than somebody who went to a trade school in Kansas or whatever. I've worked with people, all over the place, and I think maybe they're the products of that former pipeline. But I think I read the New York Times newsroom is 1,700 people from all over the world, all over the country. So even people who might be working from their apartments in Brooklyn right now, they grew up in Kentucky or Illinois or Oklahoma or the far West, and they know things about that. I mean, honestly, I wish one of these billionaires that buys a newspaper would go ahead and invest in, like, I mean, if you hired 100 reporters to just be in the state house of every capital, you would improve some of that local reporting. I mean, I would love to see bureaus. A lot of these big papers will have bureaus across the world. I'd love to see, some more regional kind of stuff. But kind of like with cable TV, stuff that's done at the local level percolates up. These big newspapers and news organizations are always looking for stuff that's happening on the ground. But I mean, I think it kind of goes both ways. For instance, there are more subscribers to the New York Times in California than there are in New York.
Interesting.
And so, one of the things that they talk about sometimes is like catering to your audience. So we're gonna do stories that matter to our readers, and if we had 1 million readers in Texas, you'd probably see a lot more Texas coverage. You'd probably see some reporters based here more often, more stories coming out of it. I don't know. I'm just kind of rambling, and I'm not like an executive. I'm not making any of these decisions,
Right.
but yeah, good stories from all over the place, and that's another thing that I hate hearing. And you see it on Twitter so much; it's a meme that someone will link to a story and say the mainstream media is not covering this. And it's like you're linking to a story right now,
It's literally
of someone
right
who
here.
is covering this. Like,
Right.
yeah. So don't like that's dumb. So I mean, it's also weird that newspapers used to cover their communities. I think a town like Abilene, Texas, 120,000 people, at one time probably had 4 or 5 newspapers.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's the thing of media consolidation. They all used to be, mostly locally owned.
Right.
Now, Gannett, who owns USA Today, owns what, like half the newspapers in the country?
Yeah. Yeah.
And then the newsroom that I worked in Abilene, when I left, there were maybe 15 people to cover a town of 120,000 people and 23 West Texas counties.
Mm-hmm.
Like that's impossible. Now it's maybe half that.
Yeah.
30 years ago, I heard there were 75 people in that newsroom. There was like a separate oil and gas desk, like with an editor and special reporters. Because people don't subscribe to local news.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I don't know. The horse is out of the barn. It's not like, I don't know if we can ever go back to that. But when hedge funds start buying papers and it turns on profitability and value for shareholders, of course they're going to keep cutting positions.
Right.
I mean, at one time, there were 2 of us covering cops and crime for a city of 120,000 people with a police department, sheriff's department, and then all those counties. Who's going to county government meetings to look at contracts being offered? I think David Simon, who wrote The Wire, and was a longtime journalist at the Baltimore Sun, I think, testified in front of Congress years ago that if you're a corrupt politician, right now is the best time to like do crimes because nobody's watching.
Yeah, nobody's paying attention.
And in a way, it's kind of like, do these communities that don't support their local journalists, they're supposedly the watchdogs, like when your water system craps out or gets poisoned because some contract was given to somebody, like, I don't know, but it's not like in Abilene right now, who can you subscribe to that's not some big corporate paper and there's 3 or 4 stories locally and all the rest is just wires from whatever. So the industry is in a horrible place, and then you're a place like the New York Times and you're the paper of record for an entire country in some ways. I'm not going to say that the Times is perfect at what they choose to cover and how to cover it, but I'd say there's stories that get covered because the New York Times is interested in it that would never get covered otherwise, even in smaller, rural, flyover country places.
Right. When I found out like the local reporter may be turning in 5 stories a day, and I was just like, there's no way you can spend any time and get quality there. You're just churning out words at that point. So
absolutely.
Okay.
And I mean things like investigative journalism, where so much corruption gets uncovered and stuff. You've got to have skilled journalists who are experienced, spending weeks digging through thousands of documents. Sometimes you FOIA documents and you want the hard info. There's a huge cost associated with that a lot of times, thousands of dollars. So a story like some big investigative piece could represent hundreds of thousands of dollars of investment in staff salaries and benefits and documents and just the time to do that. And people are like, well, I'm not gonna pay $4 a month. Pay more. Yeah,
Well, one of the things I've been kind of astounded by a lot with you talk about FOIA, so the freedom of information, how easily I've seen government agencies just sort of ignore those things, even locally. They're just like, I get an FOI, throw it in the trash. What
are you going to do?
What are you going to do about
Sue me?
it? And, yeah, because you don't, that publication doesn't have a lawyer on staff or can't afford to do this. So they just ignore it.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just like,
Yep.
this is not where we need to be. Tell you what, let's make a shift to something a little more pleasant. I've noticed
All right.
I'm going to give you 3 topics. All Dave Holloway. Baking,
Oh, man.
baking, boxing, and kissing a boy. These are the 3 Dave Holloway. I don't know. He gave me no context for any of them. He's like, they're all good stories. But the thing that I kind of want to start with is in the last 2 days, I've seen you post pictures drinking or with the Lone Star beer can in somewhere in the frame.
Mm-hmm.
Give me your thoughts on Texas beer and specifically Lone Star, because backstory is when I would do sailing charters, we would, you don't have an alcohol license, but sometimes you'll keep complimentary stuff. And I always kept Lone Star beer on the boat. And I couldn't drink. With the end of the day after it was hot and doing all that, that's what I went for. I just called it, shitty Texas beer, but it for whatever reason, there it is.
I mean, yeah, I'm not going to pretend that it's a great beer,
right?
But it's cheap and it's pretty good when it's ice cold. And so I guess I learned, owned a house in Abilene and mowing the lawn, which is really just kind of like moving a lawnmower over dirt. Mm-hmm. An ice cold Lone Star after that, is great. And then I think it's much more of a nostalgia. I kind of like I'm not a Texan. I've lived here for a long time, but I don't claim any, I think you know enough Texans to know that they get kind of precious about the state that they're from.
Yep.
But I kind of like that it pokes a little. It's the national beer of Texas. I like the little puzzles under the bottle caps. Those are fun. But in grad school, you get dollar long necks, and when you're on a student budget and you want to post up in a bar for a while with your friends, I'd rather have a few Lone Stars than a $15 cocktail. Now on the other end of that, I am pretty into. I'm looking at my box of really good single malt Scotch. So I like to. So you're not like to not be easily categorized. I'll take a cheap Lone Star and a really nice Scotch at the same time. There are many layers to my onion.
I mean, my personal preference is Shiner Bock, but there's a pizza place within walking distance of the marina, and they would always do dollar slice night. But you could get. It was dollar slice night plus like dollar Lone Star, and we would sit there and we drink, and then you try to figure out these ridiculous puzzles on the bottom of the cap.
They get harder the longer you'd go.
Yeah. So
after the 7th one, you're like, I can't even read that.
I saw those photos. I was like,
it's a nostalgia thing, and speaking of David Holloway, I think it was his friend Anthony Bourdain who was basically like, there's so much bullshit in the world. The people telling you gotta have a $10 IPA to be. I'm like, no, drink what you like. Yeah, enjoy what you like. I'm not pretending that Lone Star is an excellent beer, but it's good. It's fun.
It's good.
I'd rather have a cheap, shitty beer with good friends than the world's greatest craft beer in some douchey bar by myself.
Speaking of Bourdain, do you have Waffle House in West Texas?
No, I don't think so.
See, the nearest one. We have Waffle House all over the place here, but you can't find them south of Houston. And I thought, as many people in South stay up all night drinking, and y'all don't have Waffle Houses, I don't know how you manage. So I was just curious.
Looks like the nearest Waffle House is in Amarillo, which makes sense. It's up on a highway or an interstate.
It's on I-40. Okay. Yeah. So that takes care of the Lone Star beer question. The other we'll go with boxing. Dave said he ran into you one time. You had gotten into cardio boxing. And he said it was kind of inspiring because you had just decided to get in shape, and that's the path you chose.
Man, yeah. So I've put on a little bit more in the COVID times related to my baking. Carbs are not your friend after 40. which
I'm aware.
you may be aware of. And so living in DC, I was commuting, at least 2 hours a day. I had this job I didn't love. Eating, I was getting fat and out of shape, and my wife would try to encourage me to work out. I'm like, screw it. And then one day I decided, like, I never enjoyed exercise. I was always a nerdy kid. In South Africa, we had to do sports, and I wasn't good at them. It was never a thing. I was always more academically oriented. And then I did a story at a workshop one time on a boxer. And just remember, dude was in like great shape. And because like weightlifting and running and all that kind of stuff was just so boring, there was a gym in my neighborhood that like a free class. It was like one of these mommy boxing kind of things. I think the first class I went to was me and like 10 older Asian women. But the trainer was this guy who like fights on Showtime. Like this is his side hustle, as he teaches people to box, for money. And so, got the wraps and the stuff. And he was like, all right, so the ladies over there kind of doing their thing. And there were a couple, who really get into it. And I think the first month I did it, I probably lost 10 pounds because it was one of these like, cardio box. I don't need to get hit in the face.
Right.
I have another friend, James Gregg. I don't know if you run into him. He's a photojournalist, photo editor. He was down in Austin. And he got into boxing and was just, sparring, friendly bout. And a guy snapped off a punch just right, and it like broke his orbital bone. And the doctor was like, "You can't do this anymore." But also, like, I don't want to get hit. So I wasn't like boxing to fight, but man, get in there and do with a 16-ounce glove, like doing that 1,000 times, like it hurts. It's a workout. Yeah. And foolishly, I thought it'd be a way to kind of, tone up a little bit. Right. I didn't realize what an all body kind of thing it was. Like punches start, down at your feet. And I loved it. And so I could go into the gym and it was great cardio. It was good strength training and a little bit of therapy, whatever you're envisioning on that bag, just wailing on it for a while. And at the end of it, you're sweaty and tired. And what I learned is that I could do that a few times a week and keep eating like crap. Like, you go box for an hour and you can have a half a pizza and you still,
right.
Eventually I lost like 50 pounds. I got back into the clothes I was wearing in college, at least the sizes, thankfully not the same fashion. Late 90s in Arkansas, not exactly a highlight of couture. But yeah, I loved it. And boxing eventually got me into running because this guy, Action Douglas, is like in his 20s, 4% body fat. And, you're in the gym and he's like hitting you in the abs with a medicine ball. And I was dying. So I decided to start running so that I could keep up in the gym. And then a friend was like, "You're running quite a bit. Let's do a half marathon." And then I realized as I moved around the world, it's a lot easier to run than it is box. Because to run, you just need pair of shoes. Yeah. And so then, I haven't been near a gym in a while, but anybody looking for an exercise, like it's fantastic. I got in the best shape of my life doing it and didn't have to get hit in the face. So don't let anybody like make fun of mommy boxing. It's what you make of it. So
I know, I believe it. I started, I've got a friend of mine that has a MMA business gym. And they do everything. And so he'd been trying to get me to get into jiu-jitsu. And I'm just like, sweaty guys rolling around together. I'm not sure, but okay, whatever. I'll do it. And so, but on one side of, we were doing the jiu-jitsu stuff and grappling, but on the other side, they're having the cardio kickboxing stuff. And I was like, those people are killing it. And I was like, I would be dead if I was on that side of the room. So I can imagine.
It's humbling. I remember one time the trainer was actually training for a fight, so we had a substitute come in, and she walks in. She's this like tiny little Colombian woman, like 5 foot nothing, 100 pounds. She's like, "All right, we're doing cardio today," And I was like, all right, holy crap. She was like a little hummingbird on crack. I mean, it was
Uh-huh.
like I was so wiped out after an hour of her just like nonstop boxing, jumping, just doing all it. I was like, okay, yes,
Yeah.
never underestimate the tiny little Colombian lady could kick your ass 100 ways. So, it helps keep you humble. And
So are you running right now? Are you going outside to do anything?
a little bit, but I just my new hobby, I got a gravel bike.
Mm,
Um, I am currently in Lubbock, Texas, but I'm hoping to move to New York later when COVID's over and
hmm.
be back in a newsroom. And so a lot of my friends up there commute on bikes and just ride around. And it's so hot and windy out here that running is just really it's not pleasant. Um, and so I got a bike to kind of do a little more exploring. And when you get to be 40 plus, your knees are kind of like, yeah, I kind of hate running on
I,
concrete right now.
I've started. I actually went back to the gym this past week because it was I had my annual exam, physical exam. My doctor was like, "You have obviously not been doing, compared to last year. Your
Yeah.
vitals are not where they were, so you need to get back and doing something." And I'm like, "Okay." And honestly, the gyms are pretty empty right now, so I was like, "Okay." And so
Yeah.
I just get on and I said, I'm just going to get on a treadmill and start running. I don't want to really mess with all the machines, but if I'm on a treadmill, I feel like I'm grabbing everything. And so I started at the beginning of the week, ran a mile. Okay, I made it a mile. Next time I did 2 miles. Yesterday I ran 3 miles and my calves were like, what are you doing? Like, you haven't done anything for
Yeah.
6 months. Why? What do you think you're David Goggins? What do you think? What is this?
Yeah. That's, yeah, taking it slow and kind of rebuilding a base is important.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, COVID does legitimately freak me out. I have asthma. And so like, I want to be early on when I was reading, just, it affects your lungs and your heart. And so
Right.
I want to be in the best cardiovascular shape. I'm going to try my best not to get it, but
You,
if the most protected person in the world can get it,
yeah, you
there's
want
no
to.
guarantees. So I'm trying to like, yeah, be as healthy as I can be in case any of these yahoos in Lubbock who don't wear a mask
Yeah,
cough on me.
yeah.
Every time I go to Stripes.
If you get sick, you want to start with the strongest physiology you can. It's like, all right, I won't be. So I get that. So just the opposite of getting in shape. What have you been baking lately?
Oh man, uh, I would like it to. I'd like to go on the record that I was a sourdough bro well before lockdown.
Uh huh.
But it was really hard to find flour for a while there.
Oh yeah.
So I have been baking for a long time. In South Africa, my mom was part of like a little bakery co-op kind of thing and would make
Mm-hmm.
20, 30 cakes and cookies and pies a week. And my earliest allowance I earned by helping her out. I think she got tired of me like dipping my hand in the batter and the
Mm-hmm.
frosting and was like, I'm gonna put you to work. So I learned to bake in the kitchen when I was 10, 11 years old and loved doing it. Um, and then my first job in America actually was a cookie artist. I have excellent penmanship with a piping bag and
Nice.
frosting. Um, and then, I guess a few years ago, it's a similar to boxing. Maybe it's a great stress reliever. You
Mm-hmm.
start off with nothing, and at the end of it, it's a slow kind of meditative process for me making sourdough. I used to just blank out like a whole Sunday because it's
Mm-hmm.
kind of feed it the night before, and then you've got this whole day of stretching and folding and shaping and resting, and then at the end of it, you've got a delicious loaf of bread that you can ideally share with your coworkers, so you don't eat the whole thing
Right.
yourself. But I've got a bad sweet tooth, and so I love making cakes and cookies and um, yeah. But early this year, somebody reached out on Instagram and said, hey, I'm a producer on a reality baking show,
Mm-hmm.
and would you consider auditioning? And I was like, haha, this is obviously a joke.
Uh-huh.
But it turns out there's an American version of the Great British Bake Off. That they film it in the same tent,
Oh yeah.
and I'm sure if your students are not familiar, they should definitely check it out. It's an amazing show. But I started the process of auditioning. I think they liked the fact that I was a guy. They kept stressing that I ride motorcycles and can make like breads and cakes, and they
Yeah.
wanted a dude who can bake, and had a much longer beard back then.
Mm-hmm.
And so I had to learn to make laminated dough at home for croissant and pan au chocolat, and yeah, I love doing it. Um, Food is a, and again, it's so weird because of the COVID thing, and I love cooking food for friends and family, and baking. And bread is just like, it's this universal thing. You go anywhere in the world, well, I guess Asia, they
Mm-hmm.
probably have more of a rice staple, but you know, places in Europe and Africa that I've gotten to go, like there's some bread, and it's the simplest stuff, just some flour, water, some kind of leavening agent,
Uh-huh.
and I mean, going back to maybe our co-religion roots, but I mean, breaking bread with people is a fine pastime.
I
I
just
look forward to being able to do it again.
I just remembered something I used to do that was really mean. I didn't think it was mean. Yeah, I didn't know it was mean. On that topic. So I would do a lot of work with like worship designing and trying to figure out like how do we communicate with people in different ways and in this sort of world. And one of the things I came up with is like when we have communion on Sundays,
Mm-hmm.
I would set up a bread maker in the sanctuary behind like the altar somewhere, and I would set the timer where that bread would be ready by the time we got to the part in the service where the communion. And so
Uh-huh.
you start the service and everything's, and then while the idea is maybe the sermon or something is relating to it, and then everyone
Uh-huh.
starts smelling bread, and then
Yeah,
and then
that
kind of
is
cool thing at
funny.
when you get out, you break it and it's hot and steamy and whatnot. But I was just like, yeah, I'd forgotten about that until you just mentioned that. But yeah.
That, I mean, people usually talk about the smells and bells of high church,
Uh-huh.
but I mean, if you're doing a little emotional manipulation with fresh bread, though, that if they get somebody to go forward or sort their life out, bread is fantastic. It solves a whole lot of it causes problems,
Uh-huh.
but yeah, if I turned out to be celiac, or somebody told me like I couldn't have bread anymore,
Uh-huh.
that would be that'd be a pretty devastating blow.
My my
I
wife and
love
I
bread.
got really big into CrossFit for a while. And back then the
Hmm.
paleo diet was the thing. But my wife is much like you in the sense that she's baked forever. It's constantly baking. You never walked in the house where she wasn't baking something. She did cakes, cheesecakes, cookies. The house
Yeah.
always smelled like it. But when we got into the paleo world, we were like, oh, you can't eat all that stuff anymore. So she started experimenting with like the paleo bread,
Mm. Like
which
that 19 grains and grass and
yeah,
stuff.
you're using all kinds of like one year I bought her flowers, but I didn't buy flour like actual flowers. I went to like the health food store, flour with a U, and bought her a variety of flour. What was it?
There's a great Will Ferrell movie with that line in there.
And but yeah, that was it. Eventually, like it started out terrible, but actually by the end of it, she was getting pretty good at it, and so she could do the paleo, and I guess now it would be gluten-free bread is a lot of what she was doing. So
Yeah, man. I mean, I'm pretty simple. One thing I learned is that it's all about. I know people are like your macros and for me, it comes down to like calories in and calories out. And so if I'm
mhm,
going to eat a big chunk of real bread with gluten and all that bad stuff, then I just have to work it off.
mhm.
It's simpler that way. I don't have to think about, yeah, 19 different seeds that have to be ground up. I like wheat. I'm old fashioned.
I like it. Yeah. Uh, okay. Let's go back to Abilene because I want to talk about two things. One,
Yeah.
One, I want to talk about the egg photo, and then the other is my
Okay.
old coworker Merlin Mann, who
Merlin Man.
we inadvertently realized that we both knew.
Yeah.
So tell me about the egg
Yeah.
photo.
I can start with Merlin because
Okay.
that's especially for your students, a mentor is so valuable. And so Merlin was he kind of worked at the paper and was a faculty member at the university,
Mm-hmm.
and really just when I expressed an interest in becoming a journalist, he we'd go to lunch at my favorite Chinese place in town, and he would talk about that, just about some of his experiences, coaching, and then when he was an editor at the paper, would actually like give me some of my assignments,
Mm-hmm.
and would have to fix everything that I did.
Mm-hmm.
And so I don't think he wasn't around too long before he left for Arkansas, where I
Mm-hmm.
guess you crossed paths with him.
Yep.
But yeah, reaching out to people, I think like people aren't going to tap you on the shoulder and go, "I'd like to be your mentor." And so
Mm-hmm.
reaching out to identifying people that can help you learn and grow, and then
Mm-hmm.
actually asking for that relationship, because it involves an investment of time and energy, and it's not necessarily a casual thing. It can be, there's different levels, but yeah, find somebody that can help and actually make the ask. Like, say, I would like you to be a mentor, or could we go to lunch and talk about this or that, or here's a story I wrote. Would you look at it? Very, very important. And yeah, if it hadn't been for like some lunches over cheap Chinese food, I might have gotten this. I think if nothing else, the fact that he was kind of like, that encourager to say,
Mm-hmm.
keep doing this, keep trying to get better. Yeah,
I knew what. So I was there when he got hired there, and so when he came on, he was kind of this crusty old old veteran, and
newspaper guy.
he's an old newspaper guy, which is what and we needed that, and I knew we'd made a good decision as soon as I started hearing students complaining about how picky he was about their writing, and I was like, yeah, you need it, take that, because
Mm-hmm.
I'm tired of uh, but the other thing, going back to what you originally talked about, he's such a good human being. I was also on the
Yeah,
board for one of the local, it's a homeless advocacy group, and he was on the board with that too. And so getting to see like both sides of him, like the, take no prisoners, you're going to use that punctuation properly, and, make sure
yeah,
you write a good lead. And also there's this other side, which is just a tremendously good human being. I'm just like, I hated when, because he finally retired and went back to Abilene. And so I was just like, I'm going to miss that guy.
yeah,
So,
yeah, yeah. So I can't remember. I don't think Merlin was around when the egg happened, but that's just one of the beautiful stories about working at a little paper in West Texas is that you might have an idea for how your day is going to go,
mm-hmm.
and then a call to the newsroom, that unfortunately is my most famous photograph ever, um, because I don't know, it was just a slow news day or something, but this woman named Cookie, which is automatically that's
Right.
pretty great.
Right.
Well, woman named Cookie called the newsroom and said that, talked to the clerk, that one of her chickens had laid a big egg. And I remember my desk was right across from him, and he was kind of like, "Got a woman says something about a big egg,"
You draw this
and I was
flaw.
like, "Sure, why not? I'll talk to," because you get a lot of crazy calls at the newspaper.
Mm-hmm.
I used to get jail mail from legitimately mentally ill people, or
Mm-hmm.
somebody like, what time is Days of Our Lives on? They would call the newspaper for all kinds of fun reasons, and so
Right.
I was like, everybody else was out working, and I don't know, maybe I didn't have that much going on. I was like, I'll talk to her. So transfers the call, and I talk to her, and she just is going on about how big this egg is. And I was like, like, how big? And she told me, and I was like, that can't be right.
Uh-huh.
'Cause I think she meant like what she was saying made it sound like it was going to be the size of a softball.
Uh-huh.
And so I was like, all right, I'm gonna drive out to this woman's farm and do a story about her egg who laid a giant, or her chicken who laid a giant egg. Got to get the right one in
Uh-huh.
first. So I drive out there, and she points out the chicken in the yard that she thinks laid it. And we go inside, and she shows me there's like one of her regular eggs, and then this giant egg, and she's just going on about how she thinks it's a mutant super egg. I can't remember what we called it, but it was very obviously large.
Did the
And so I
chicken
photographed her holding it, and she put it in the egg thing, and then we got out. I think I took along a pica pole from the newsroom to like measure it,
uh
and so I'm like, okay, this is just going to be one of those weird stories.
Did, just out of curiosity,
And then she,
did the chicken look like it had PTSD or anything like that from delivering this thing?
no, they all
Everything's
look they
good.
all look fine.
Nothing's traumatized.
Yeah,
Okay.
no, nothing, no animals were harmed in the production of that egg
Okay.
that I could tell. So I'm wrapping up. I got a couple of quotes from her about the mutant super egg, and I got these pictures. And then she said, "Do you think I should crack it?" I'm like, "Well, of course you should crack it,
What else?
especially before the TV guys get wind of this,
Right.
because that's you always want the exclusive. You want to scoop the other guys." So I'm
Right.
like, I am going to own Super
Right.
Egg. And so, she gets ready, she gets a plate, and I get my camera, and she cracks it open, and out comes a yolk and a white and a whole other egg, like just in there.
It's
And she's like, "Oh my God." And I'm like, "Well, that's weird. Never seen that." She cracks that one open, and it's another egg
just like it's
inside.
like a
So it's an
Russian
egg
doll
inside an
thing.
egg. Exactly. And so I was like, "Are you gonna like you can make an omelet out of that? Are you gonna fry?" She's like, "Oh, I don't think I can eat it." She thought this was really something strange and mutant.
Hmm.
So I think she just put it down the garbage disposal. I go back to the newsroom. I called someone in the bird department at Texas A&M, I think.
Hmm.
So here's the story, and he was like, "Oh yeah, it's not that crazy. That apparently in the process of laying an egg, if a chicken gets scared, it can go up instead of out, and so it goes back up into the egg making place, and so the chicken just made another egg around this egg, and then it came out on Cookie's farm." And I'm not sure if your students are aware, but most local papers are members of the Associated Press. It's a
Hmm.
not for profit association, and so you get their stuff, but you're supposed to give them your stuff. And so out on the wire that day went pictures of Cookie's super mutant egg and a little write up about the whole experience. And I guess something in the water that day, it made it to NPR. Texas Monthly wrote about it. It went out on the wire, and then all of these other member newspapers and TV stations picked it up, and it started appearing in photo galleries. So now, like that picture has gone around the world millions of times, and it's still like if I Google myself to like see what happened, it's still just this giant super egg. So you'd like to think as a journalist you're gonna be known for some big important story you worked on, and if when I die years from now, somebody's researching, they're gonna be like, and he once covered the story of the giant super egg. Because that's gonna be what rises to the top of my search results, I think. But I mean, as a picture, it's not bad. I mean, I, I should probably get a print of that and put it on my
You
wall.
probably should. Like
Just
that should be the thing behind your desk. Like, and that people just don't explain it.
yeah,
It's just there. Okay, great. Anything
man,
else you want to cover that we didn't talk about?
man. Not that I can think of. I mean, to be a little cheesy,
Uh huh.
being a journalist has been, a few years ago, I thought I was ready to get out of it, that I was feeling kind of burned out. The commuting time, the pay was all terrible. And I thought, you know what? I'm ready for a change, and I went into the corporate commercial world for a little while.
Mm-hmm.
But now being back in journalism for just a few weeks or a month, it reminds me that like I really do love this, and there's something about like the press pass or being a journalist. It's a way to. When I was working at a small paper and not as an editor, maybe it's because like I am just curious. Maybe that's one thing that makes me okay at this. But that was like a passport or a permission slip to just. Without that, if I went up and knocked on somebody's door, like, what's going on here? I want to know what's happening. They'd be like, get off my porch. But I remember, grad school one time, I was working for the local paper, and I drove by a prosthetics clinic, a place that makes fake arms and legs, and I just knocked on the door and said, "Hi, I'm from the paper. I'm curious about what you guys do here. Could I hang out for a little while?" And they were like, "Well, come on in." And they showed me this special hand that's Bluetooth powered, and I'm just like, holy cow. I've gotten to travel around the world and meet incredible people and tell some fun stories. And it's, I'm not wealthy. I don't know if I'll ever be able to retire or will just die at a desk someday. But man, at the Missouri workshop, the Missouri Photo Workshop, there's it's kind of a tradition. There's a guy named Jim Richardson has done for years. He covered the small town of Cuba, Kansas, and it became this incredible body of work where he just went to this small town over and over again for all these years. And they do this show, and there's just this, seeing that and the ability that journalists have to tell the stories of a community, it really is an incredible privilege. And I think a lot of times we can get cynical, we can get salty about the economic problems and the just all the negative stuff I think we talked about today, the fake news and all that kind of stuff. But man, at the end of the day, getting to do this, to talk to people, to try to understand the world, to help other people understand the world, is super, super cheesy. But if your students have not watched The Secret Life of Walter Mitty, I would highly recommend it.
Oh yeah.
Because there aren't a whole lot of movies out there about photo editors. So I love it. But in particular, that I think it's fake. I think it was made up for the movie. But that whole motto of Life magazine back then about I can't even remember the exact wording of it. But man, to go out into the world and to see things and to share that with your readers or your viewers, that's pretty incredible. So
it's almost,
if you can make it work economically, whatever, if that means busting your ass, I waited tables, I edited master's theses for years to pay my rent so that I could go learn to be a journalist at night and on the weekends. And so, when I taught at Maryland, I actually used to try to discourage my students from pursuing journalism, knowing in a way that the ones who would make it would be the ones who would hear that and go, screw you, I'm going to do this anyway. I'm going to find a way to make it happen. Whether that means marrying a doctor or a lawyer, that could work, winning the lottery, or, bust your ass doing 2 or 3 jobs to make enough money to go out and do a story that you care about and get out in front of people. And it's an incredible privilege to get to tell people stories. And so shouldn't be taken lightly. But yeah, if you can find a way to do it, it can be pretty rewarding.
Dude, I don't know if you can end
Not
any better. I don't know if you can end
Lone Star.
But I do not think you can end better than you just did. So I'm gonna click the stop button. Hey, I'll stay on here as we close out here in a little bit. But Greg, thanks. And just out of curiosity, for my students who want to follow you on Instagram or whoever else out there wants to get in touch with you, where can you be found?
Greg KB is my Instagram handle, and that'll link you to my website, which got my email address. And yeah, reach out. I love looking at work, and being an editor makes you just a professional busybody. You get to have opinions on things, but yeah, I love working with students who have some sort of passion for this. Love looking at story ideas and pitches and portfolios, and offering some help if it can be of help. Some feedback and some criticism, critique.
They need the
Which
critique.
man, oh, I mean, you mentioned it a little bit. That's one thing you definitely have to get used to. You got to have a bit of a thick skin and know that it's to make the work better, not just to pick somebody apart.
Right.
But I did see that in some of my undergrad colleagues and other students. People make fun of this generation and their participation trophies and all that stuff. Learning how to take critique and appreciate it and seek it out is another valuable skill. To not take everything personally. But yeah, it's a skill just like any other that you got to develop. Having somebody tear your work apart to make it better, it stings,
right?
But also worth it.
Okay. Thank you very much, sir. Have a great day.